I'm Dr. Dillard. Follow me on my journey on becoming a slave master. On this journey, I will be tracing my family's roots back to the slave plantation where they worked as slaves. I will use my family and their slave master's family to contrast why we have a rich and prosperous white America and a poor black America. Once I trace my roots back to the slave plantation, I will trace the owner or the slave master of the plantation. I will trace the slave master's roots, and in doing so, we will see how and when he came to America. We will see if he had money and wealth when he arrived to the New World. We will follow him to see just how he became involved in the slave trade. We'll see how he obtained land to start a slave plantation. We shall see how he used his slaves to make money. We will look at how he used slavery and the profits he made from it to create a better life for himself and his descendants. We will look at his descendants and their prosperity. In 1793, the Virginia State General Assembly authorized construction of a tobacco warehouse at Wayne's Fall. This marked the start of the town as the world's best tobacco market. The village was renamed Danville by an act of the Virginia legislature on November 23, 1793. The downtown district hosts many tobacco warehouses. These warehouses held tobacco from the surrounding slave plantations, like the Swanson Plantation in Swansonville, located just 10 miles northeast of Danville. Tobacco auctions was held in the warehouses. During the Civil War, they were used as prisons to hold captured Union soldiers. These are my relatives, descendants of slaves who worked on the Swanson Plantation. Like most African American descendants of slaves, they have struggled to manage to eke out a meager living, while all the time having to endure poverty, oppression, discrimination, and not allowed to fully participate in America's prosperity. Although later we shall see how they created it. This is the gravesite of my grandfather, John Albert Swanson. Like most slave descendants, he held a name similar to the slave master's offspring, whose name was John Muse Swanson. This is Claude Swanson, his father, and my great-great-grandfather. He was born a slave, and that's why we have no photos of him. He took the name of his slave master's son, whose name was also Claude. Both of their African heritage, as well as mine, completely erased. This is the substandard housing they lived in as they slaved away, creating a prosperous life for white people to enjoy. The slave descendants were relegated in an area in Danville called Almagro. As kids, we often referred to it as meaning all Negro. It was a very hilly land and very hard to grow crops for food, because when we planted seed, it was washed away during heavy rains. But then we were black and placed on the dismal margins of society to stay out of sight of the manicured white community. I'm driving to Swansonville, named for the Swanson slave master. It is the site of the Swanson Plantation. It's the site that for centuries my ancestors worked for free, creating a very prosperous life for the slave masters. You have to wonder what kind of people who would not share with their slaves, who created prosperity for them, some type of generosity. The Swansonville Methodist Church sits in the center of what used to be the plantation. Behind the church is the cemetery of the Swanson ancestors, all slave masters who ran the plantation over a couple of centuries. The obelisk gravestone tell us they were Freemasons, like George Washington and other signers of the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. They were large landowners who used slaves to create their wealth. The Swanson plantation stretched as far as the eye could see, plus the Swansons owned plantations in Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, Southern Virginia, and in 3 counties in Georgia. Their crop was mostly tobacco on the Virginia plantation, with some corn, and in Georgia they grew cotton. Let's go find out just who are the Swanson slave masters. I'm here at the Atlanta airport on my way to Stockholm, Sweden. Stockholm is the birthplace of the slave master Swanson. I'm going to Stockholm because I want to be able to trace his roots and how he got started, what ship he came to America on, the year he came to America, just actually how he came to America and became a slave master, enslaving human beings, which were my descendants, my family. I've already introduced you to my family, and I've introduced you to the plantation in Swansonville where my family worked on. So follow with me to Sweden, and let's find out just who the slave master was. Stockholm at the airport, and I'm going over to check into my hotel, and then I'm going to go to the historical museum to look up information on the Swansons. Stockholm is the capital of Sweden. It encompasses 14 islands and more than 50 bridges on an extensive Baltic Sea archipelago. The cobblestone streets and colored buildings of the Old Town are home to the 13th century Royal Palace and the Naval Museum, which focuses on the Nobel Prize. Ferries and sightseeing boats shuttle passengers between the islands. I'm in Stockholm at the Swedish Historical Society, and in this building is the genealogy of the Swansons. I'm at the Nordic Museum here in Stockholm. In this museum, they're supposed to have records of the Carmel Nickel. The Carmel Nickel was the ship that Sweyn Garnason and his family sailed to America on in 1638. According to the Nordic Museum's records, Sweyn Garnason was the patriarch to the Swansons. He had immigrated to Sweden from Finland, where he was convicted and sentenced to 6 years indentureship in America for desertion of the Swedish army while Sweden was at war with Denmark. He and his family was put on board the Carmel Nickel, a sailing ship, and sent to America in 1640 to work in the Swedish colony in Delaware. His descendants anglicized Garnason to Swanson after a few years living in America. I visited the Swedish Naval Museum to see a replica of the ship, the Carmel Nickel. I also learned at the Nordic Museum that Gustavus Adolphus II, King of Sweden, from 1611 until 1632. Under his rule, Sweden became a superpower and the third largest nation in Europe after Russia and Spain. He died while leading a charge at the Battle of Lutzen. Christina, his underage daughter, inherited the crown. Her regency, those charged with her care, desired to establish a colony in America. After conquering Finland, many Finns immigrated into Sweden. Because Finland was heavily forested and they lived in the forest, they were called forest Finns. They used slash and burn agriculture and was burning down the forest in northern Sweden. They were also agitators of the Swedish government and many deserted from the Swedish army. Because they posed so many problems to the government, the Swedish crown rounded up the deserters to send to work as indentures in the new colony to be in America. Peter Minuit, who purchased Manhattan Island for $24 from the Indians for the Dutch, partnered with the Swedish government to create their first colony in the New World. Sven Gunnarsson was one of the deserters that was captured. He and his pregnant wife and 2 young children were put on board the Kalmar Nickel, a sailing ship, and sent to America in 1640. Peter Minuit and the Swedish government formed the New Sweden Company. Its charter included Swedish, Dutch, and German stockholders, and by directors of the New Sweden Company, Minuit would be the governor of the new colony. Minuit had the men perform small repairs and stock the Kalmar Nickel for the voyage to America. On a sunny morning in 1640, he ordered the men to lower the sails, man the guns. They fired cannon shots as they set the sails for the voyage to America. After a couple of days of sailing, a violent storm nearly destroyed the ship. The Kalmar Nickel found shelter in the harbor of Texel, a port city in Holland. Once the repairs were completed, the ship continued on its voyage to the New World. Along the way, Sven Gunnarsson's wife, Gertrude, delivered their 3rd child, whom they named Olive. They called him Olive for short. Within a couple of months, they sailed into the Delaware Bay, passing Cape May and Cape Henlopen. And anchored at Memphis Keel, known today as Swedes Landing, at Fort Christina, named for Queen Christina. Minuit met with the Delaware and the Susquehannock chiefs and persuaded them to sign deeds for land in West Philadelphia, southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware, and coastal Maryland. Later, Chief Matterhorn of the Delawares claimed the land purchased was within an area marked by only 6 trees. The rest of the land occupied by the Swedes was stolen. Sweyn Gunnarsson worked on the Fort Christina tobacco plantation until 1645. In October 1645, he was granted his freedom and became Sweyn the Miller because he operated the first grist mill built in New Sweden. In 1664, he moved his family to Wakako, to an 1,125-acre plantation he had paid the Indians a teapot and some trinkets for. Later, the chief said he was only allowed land he could walk from sunup to sundown. Maybe he ran 1,125 acres in a day. Sweyn built the Glory Day Church on the land in 1677. He died about 1678 and one of the first to be buried at the Wakako Church. After the death of Sweyn, his 3 sons, Sweyn, Olive, and Anders, inherited the 1,125 acres he had bought from the Indians for a teapot and a few trinkets. In 1655, New Sweden, the Swedish colony, was captured by the Dutch. Sweyn's 3 boys, Sweyn, Olive, and Anders, ceded all but 690 acres to William Penn in 1682 for his charter to develop what is now Philadelphia. Each of his sons kept 230 acres. They anglicized their last name to Swanson and assimilated into the current English culture. Sweyn and Olive became members of the Upland Court, allowed by the English to have jurisdiction over the former Swedish colonies. Andrew's son, Anders, went on to become the progenitor of the DuPonts of Delaware. Andrew's son, William, migrated to Goochland County, Virginia, where he prospected in lands and created slave plantations. In December 1750, he bought a 200-acre plantation. In June 1752, he sold a 200-acre plantation and bought an 800-acre plantation. In December 1752. In December 1757, he sold 300 acres of the 800-acre plantation. In December 1761, he sold off another 100 acres of the plantation. In October 1762, he sold the remaining 400 acres. Within a month, he bought 282-acre plantation in Bedford County in November 1762. He bought another 325 acres in that same month in Bedford County. He received a land grant from the Virginia Company, who dismissed the rights of the Native Americans, claiming right of discovery. They granted him 320 acres to develop into another plantation in August of 1763. In June 1769, he sold 125 acres. In July 1769, he sold a 325-acre plantation. In September 1772, he sold 282 acres. And in February 1773, he sold 320 acres. William moved into Pennsylvania County, and in November 1768, he bought 400 acres. December of the same year, he bought 100 acres. 242 acres was transferred to William on May 1786. The tide tables show some of his slaves: Rogers, Daniel, Venus, and Sarah. In August 1779, he started buying plantation land in Henry County, where he bought 162 acres. In October of that same year, he sold 150 acres he held in Pennsylvania County. Finally, he started plantations in Franklin County, Virginia. In January 1787, he bought 200-acre plantation. In February 1787, he sold 175 acres of his Pennsylvania County plantation. On March 1787, he sold 175 acres on both sides of Bull Run River, his Pennsylvania County plantation. The soil in Virginia exhausted key nutrients, in particularly nitrogen, so most plantations were only good for growing tobacco for just 2 to 3 years. The enslaved masters moved to new land to make into plantations. William seemed to have mastered that process concerning his buying and selling of plantations in 5 counties in Virginia. Where did he get the slaves to work the plantations? Where did they come from? And just who were these people that came enslaved into such foreign land? Let's explore the slaves that worked on the Swanson plantations and other slave plantations in America.